So we'll go through an injury scenario again today. And for this one today, we have a football player that went to go and kick a field goal after a touchdown. And the opposing team came and tried to block it. In the process, though, they blocked or stopped the motion of the kicker's legs. Now, they'd get a penalty for that in the game, but in the process of the opposing team blocking the kicker's legs, the kicker collapses down to the ground. So we, the trainer, go out on the field to do our history and assessments. And so as part of our history, we're going to ask what happened. Now, we were watching the play, so we saw it, but the kicker also lets us know, yep, I went to kick the ball, and right before I made contact with the ball, the opponent's body was there. So I ended up, my leg stopping its forward motion much sooner than where it normally would. Where is the pain? And they point to their anterior thigh about halfway down the thigh. So right in the middle of the thigh on the front. Rate your pain, and they'd give it a 6 out of 10. And right away we want to know what is your 10 out of 10. And they'll say they fractured their thumb in the past. So we know they have a good handle on pain. Any prior injuries to that area? Unless they know that they've had some tightness in that quads throughout the season, and it's raining during the game and it's cold and they haven't had a lot to do during this game, so they didn't get much of a warm-up before this kick. Snap or pop, this is an acute traumatic injury, so did they feel a snap or pop? And they say, yep, they felt a bit of a pop right where their pain is at the time of hitting the opponent's body. Better or worse? Better, not a whole lot makes it feel better at this point. They're still laying down on the ground. If they put a little bit of pressure on it, that seems to decrease the pain somewhat. Worse, if we try to get them up and walking on it, there's noticeable pain, so there's a limp as they're walking. If we do some quick range of motion, it hurts to bend the knee. If we ask them to push or extend their knee into our resistance, that further increases their pain as well. Medications, no medications. Allergies, they're lactose intolerant, not really applicable here to this injury. So we'll move on to our observation, and when we pull up the football pants and remove the thigh pads, we can see already some redness and swelling in the area. If we saw them the next day at practice, they'd have some bruising in the area where their pain is. Again, while they're walking off the field, they need some support underneath the shoulder of that same side, because there's a fairly significant limp when they try to weight bear on the injured side. They can't really squat down. When we ask them to squat, most of the weight is on the non-injured leg on the way down and the way up, and they're holding onto the treatment table at the same time. When we get into our range of motion, we're concerned about muscles of the anterior thigh, and so majority of the quads act on the knee, so we're going to do knee range of motion. But remember, rectus femoris of the quadriceps also acts on the hip. So for knee, we're going to be looking at flexion and extension. For the hip, rectus femoris is only involved with helping hip flexion, and there'll be stretch placed through the muscle when the hip extends. There's not a whole lot of involvement with hip abduction and adduction or internal external rotation, so in that case we don't have to assess those movements. So we'll do active range of motion first. For active knee flexion, it is decreased moderately and they have moderate pain. For active knee extension, it's decreased just mildly, and that's mostly due to the moderate pain that they have trying to extend the knee. For active hip flexion, decreased mildly, but they have moderate pain. And active hip extension, it is decreased moderately with moderate pain. Next, we'll move on to passive range of motion. And for passive range of motion, remember we're moving the body part for them. So when we do passive knee flexion, it's still decreased moderately. And if we try to get more movement, they have quite a bit of pain. Passive knee extension, now it's full range of motion since we're moving it for them and they don't have any pain at all. Passive hip flexion, they have full range of motion, but they get some mild pain with that. And then passive hip extension, because it would be putting stretch through rectus femoris, decreased moderately with moderate pain. Next, we're going to do our resisted range of motion or strength testing. And resisted knee flexion, we're using the hamstring, so it's not recruiting the quadriceps at all. So strength is 5 out of 5. Resisted knee extension, the exact movement that they were doing when they experienced the injury is quite weak and they have moderate pain. Remember, rectus femoris assists with hip flexion, so for strength, 4.5 out of 5, there is some weakness and they have moderate pain. And for resisted hip extension, our glute max and our hamstrings cause that motion, so there's full strength and no pain with that. When we get into our special tests, we're going to do a few different special tests. We can do our quadriceps length test and then the rectus femoris specific length test. For our special tests, our quads length test. So laying face down, passively flexing the knee and measuring the distance between the heel and the buttocks. And with that on the right, we'll say we're at 4 fist widths. The right is the injured side. On the left, we're only at 1 fist width. So a significant difference from side to side. When we do our rectus femoris specific, then we'll have the athlete laying on their side. We hook their foot and ankle around our rib cage. One hand is supporting their pelvis so they don't roll backwards, and the other hand is holding underneath their medial knee, and we first passively extend their hip to put some stretch through rectus femoris, and then we just move our torso to add in the passive knee flexion. And again, with our rectus femoris, I will say on the right, when we look at the distance between the heel and the buttocks, 3.5 fist widths, but on the left, we're only half a fist width. So again, significant difference from side to side. We can do our quad circumference. And when we measure quad circumference, that it's significantly increased on the right-hand side. Now they're right leg dominant, so we would expect the measurements to be a centimeter and a half larger on the right-hand side normally, but especially at 20 centimeters above the base of the patella, it's 5 centimeters greater on the right side compared to the left. So we know there's some localized swelling in that area as a result of the injury that's occurred. Palpation. We're going to palpate along rectus femoris, vastus medialis, vastus lateralis, and we about halfway down the length of rectus femoris. We feel some swelling, even a little bit of heat coming off the area, and they have moderate pain when we palpate over where they pointed to where their injury occurred. We don't feel a defect within the muscle tissue. Vastus medialis is okay, vastus lateralis, no problem. Vastus intermedius we can't palpate because it's directly underneath rectus femoris. Special tests, you could also do your VMO contraction, but that's typically only significant with our chronic knee injuries and swelling within the knee causing atrophy of the muscles. So we wouldn't see anything significant with our VMO contraction. Our diagnosis is a quadriceps strain, and we want to be more specific than that. We know it's right in the middle, about halfway down to rectus femoris. And the majority of our findings was moderate pain and moderate weakness. And we know moderate corresponds to grade 2, so grade 2 strain of the rectus femoris. If most of our findings were mild, we'd say grade 1. If most of our findings were severe, and if we felt that defect within the tissue on palpation, we would say grade 3. When it comes to treatments, police, we're going to rest, elevate to the leg. They may be on crutches if they continue to have a limp. And then after a few weeks' time, we're going to start working on gentle range of motion. So passive knee flexion, and then active assisted, so they can put a towel around their lower leg and assist the knee into flexion by pulling the towel in the lower leg towards them. We'll move on to rolling with a foam roller and a rolling pin to whatever tissue depth they can tolerate, and then potentially some soft tissue work and massage. But similarly with our strain, we're not going to do a whole lot of heat or deep tissue massage right away while there's still a lot of bleeding within the tissue. When we get to strengthening, we're going to start with isometric. So isometric strengthening for the quads, sitting in a chair, facing the wall, feet up against the wall, and you're trying to lengthen your legs, so straighten the legs out, or do a quad extension exercise. And so you're sitting facing the wall and you're just trying to straighten the knees. The wall is not going to move, so you're contracting the quads, but they're not changing length. So it's an isometric quadriceps exercise. When you are doing isotonic, that's where you're going to use the knee extension machine. So loading up the weight to what they can tolerate, 1, 2, 3 sets of 10 repetitions, extending the knee. And then when we get to eccentric for the quadriceps, you're still going to use the knee extension machine. You'll lower the weight down and you'll use both legs to raise the weight up. And then you're going to take the non-injured leg out of the weight machine, and all the weight's going to be on the injured leg, and you slowly lower the knee back down into flexion. So the quadriceps are contracted, but lengthening at the same time as you lower the lower leg down. And again, you'll increase the number of repetitions and sets and weights with that gradually. Balanced proprioception will apply here. So some of our double leg, single leg, stable surface to more unstable surface, foam mat, Bosu ball, or rocker board. The running progression is going to apply here. It's a kicker in football, so we're going to gradually increase the intensity or force behind their kicks, as well as the distance they're trying to kick the football over time. We may want to do a compression tensor wrap over the quadriceps when they return to sports, maybe even pad the area when they return. And then we'll go through our return to sport progression, light drills, harder drills, light contact, full contact, and return to sport. So that's our injury scenario with a rectus femoris strain.